Tonight we're moving into Unit 4, which covers Chapter 32 in the book. It's the second last chapter in the physical copy of the book, and it focuses around database connectivity and programming related to working with databases. Now, by virtue of being in this class, you should have fulfilled a number of prerequisites. One of them ideally should be working with advanced databases, that course where you learn all your SQL stuff, and you were working with Microsoft SQL Server, and then hopefully in the PHP class, and maybe even in a couple other classes, you learned how to work with MySQL, where you actually connected a web application to a database and were able to read and write data back and forth. And that's essentially what this chapter is about. Now, the way that this chapter is written, it kind of works on the assumption that you might be coming in with maybe no database training at all. So it does begin by talking about what, database systems are, how they work, how they interface. It talks a little bit about the SQL language. So you can review some of that. You guys, I don't think I have to repeat any of those topics for anybody, but if there's any terminology that we use that's kind of like off the charts for you, just let me know. I always tell people it's great to know databases, but when it comes to actually programming, you don't really do a lot more than read and write to a table. If you're doing really complicated SQL statements, chances are you have like a database administrator that puts that stuff together for you, and then you just trigger the procedure or whatever the case may be. But the basic concepts of storing information in tables. One row is a record. Every record needs to be unique, so you have to have some sort of unique identifier. The columns are named. The columns hold certain types of data. I think that's pretty obvious. There's also the relational component of it, right, where you can have multiple tables and they'll have some sort of a field that allows them to kind of sync up, basically. There's all sorts of little things that you can learn about databases, but when it comes down to it, probably the most important part for us is knowing how to connect to one and then how to execute some simple SQL statements. So from the database courses that you've taken, or from the PHP classes that we've had, you will have learned at least some rudimentary SQL statements. And the truth is, you don't really need anything that complicated to do the work here. It really is just reading and writing to tables. They do point us here to a number of different types of database systems that you can interface with. Java is one of these systems that allows you, with the right connection scripts, to connect to really any major type of database pretty easily. The connection scripts are somewhat pre-written, so you'll get a tool, you'll get a piece of software that basically handles most of that for you. You just need to know how to employ it, and then you need to know how to log into the database. So a real essential component is that you have a database to begin with. So that's one of the things we're going to do tonight, is we're going to, I believe all of you have Kronos accounts, so we're going to use your Kronos account. I see one person looking around the room. We're going to use your Kronos account to create a database. We're going to create a MySQL database that we're going to connect to. So our locally run applications are going to connect to the internet to a database there. We could very conceivably create and run a database right on the machine that you're working on. The school machines already are preloaded with MySQL as a database. They also have SQL Server running, and they're there. All you have to do is tap into them. The problem is that you might not have that at home. The other approach is that you could have like a bundled web server software package, and I'm not sure if I have WAMP installed or if I have, not Cortana, that one installed, XAMPP. And I don't know if you guys play with these products at all, but that's like a resident web server. It's a web server that gets loaded on your machine, and it has the Apache web server software, MySQL database, all the PHP tools, and a couple of other things. And basically it's a standalone web server environment. So if you were working on PHP, for example, you wouldn't need to load it on to a server out in cyberspace somewhere. You could just work locally on your machine. Now I do teach those techniques to people, but the truth is when you're actually working on certain things, you can work locally. If you're doing development work, you could work on your own hard drive and not connect to an external database, right? Because you're just working on it. You can pick up your machine, take it anywhere. You don't need an internet connection, and you can still create your pages and do the database connections and all that stuff, just as if you were working on the web. But we have Kronos available to us, and it's a live system, so we don't have to go through the process of installing any software. All we have to do is connect to Kronos, make sure we have a database created that we can connect to, and I'll show you guys how to do that. And then once it's there, we just put in a little bit of a connection script, and boom, everything will go. All right, so that's going to be one of the first things that we're going to do. Now you can see here, right here on this page, and this is probably one of the more important parts of tonight, is making sure that you guys can do this. Now here's the caveat. Some of these commands as they're listed here will not work on Kronos. And the reason why is because you're not authenticated to do these things, basically. What they're assuming here is that you are working with MySQL loaded on your machine, or you're working with MySQL with root level access, which on a system like Kronos or just about any web server environment, that's never going to be the case. Not unless you built the server yourself and installed the software. Very often, not even database admins have that capability. So that's the first part of it. So I'm going to pause the video here for a second just to take a quick little poll in class and see who may or may not have a Kronos account. So I'll be right back in just a moment. All right, we took a little detour here to make sure everybody had accounts on the Kronos server and that everybody also had a database account on the Kronos server. It is possible to have a regular Kronos account where you can do FTP and web work but not have the database account. So if you're running any of these commands that we're about to do and you happen to not have the database account, then you need to contact me and I will set one up for you and make sure it works. All right, so let's go back to this topic here talking about MySQL. MySQL is a piece of database software that typically runs on Linux machines. So Linux machines tend to be the world's web servers. Like a majority of the web servers out there run on Linux. The Apache web server software runs the web pages, and then MySQL will run the databases typically on those systems. Now, you can load MySQL onto a Windows machine as a standalone piece of software, just like you would with SQL Server. So if you've had the database class, you'll recognize that. You can use that XAMPP control panel for a local web server, which also bundles it in. So there's a number of different ways to access MySQL, but just to kind of reiterate, and I forget if I said this in the video or if we did it off video, that there's a number of different ways that you can work with MySQL. The mindset here is that all of the web students will have Kronos accounts anyhow, and there's a MySQL database there, and this way we just connect to that externally over the web, and we don't have to worry at all about any of the other installing pieces of software or configuring them to work right. But the point for clarity is that these instructions are intended for people that are running it locally on their own machine and do have root level access. The problem is that unless you basically install the database, you're the one installing it, you're not going to have root level access. All right, so let's go ahead and basically do all of these commands here in a very different form. You're going to see it's going to be much simpler than this, and we're going to do it from a command prompt. Now this is going to require a special piece of software. All the school machines have this software already loaded. If you're using your own machine and it's not loaded, then I need to guide you to get a piece of software. So why don't we begin by doing that? I'm going to bring up my web browser and open a tab here. And what we're looking for is a piece of software called PuTTY. which is Putty. The website is putty.org. And it's not a very fancy web page. This is all there is to it, what you see. And Putty is just basically a way to provide command line access to a Linux or Unix operating system. On a Windows machine, we hit the start menu, we type CMD, and we get the command prompt. This is basically the equivalent, but for a Linux machine. The problem is, though, that Windows command prompt will not interface with the Linux system. If you happen to be on a Macintosh, though, that terminal, the command prompt on a Macintosh, it's called the terminal program, that will interface directly with Linux systems. All right, and for those of you that are not familiar with that, as soon as I get Putty running here, I'll do a remote connection to my home machine where I do have a Mac, and I'll show you the terminal interface there. So for Putty, all you have to do is click on this link here. All right, so to download the piece of software, you just click on this link here, and they have like a bunch of cryptic looking download stuff. But really all you need to do is grab this very first file. It's just a standalone executable file because there's not really much to it. So you just download that file and then run it. I happen to already have it downloaded, and I have it in a download folder somewhere, or a software folder, I think. So I'm going to bring this onto my other screen here. And I have this habit where I always keep a folder or two on my machines that just hold software and not stuff that gets installed in the registry. So I have Putty right down here. See that little exe file? Same one you should download. And all you have to do is give it a double click to launch it. There's not much more to it than just typing the name of the server right here and clicking open. That's all there is to using the software, basically. Now, for those of you that are having a hard time reading that, the address for it is Kronos, that's Kronos .gtc.edu. I'm going to pull that over to the screen here so you can see it. That's the web address that you want to type in. And all my web students, that should be just about everybody listening to this video, should already know that and most likely already have an account. But like I said, if you don't have an account, then you need to contact me and I will set those up for you. All right, so once you have that address typed in, all you have to do is click on Open. And then you'll get a prompt that looks like this. One small caveat. People here in the classroom connected to the school's network can directly do what I did. If you are at home, though, you need to install VPN software to be able to connect to the server. That might be a new thing for you, too. If you've never done Kronos work before, you might not be aware of that component. So let me take you to our course shell, wherever that is, right there. And in the course shell, under the resources page, it's a pretty standard thing I throw in there. Well, I guess I didn't throw it in here, did I? All right. I guess I'm going to have to add it. I have instructions for connecting to the VPN. So if you give me a second, I'm going to pause and then copy the instructions into our course shell. Okay, so I went ahead and I added the resource or the VPN instructions to the bottom of our resources page in the course shell. So if you are new to doing VPN to gateway, the instructions are right here. And if you don't find these instructions, you can actually just go to the gateway web page. And just right in the search box, just type VPN. Then the first thing that comes back should be the instructions. You just follow those instructions. In essence, what you're going to do is you're going to download a piece of software from Cisco called Cisco AnyConnect Secure Mobility Client. I discovered that you cannot just use the built-in Windows VPN client. It will not work. The system is configured only to work with the Cisco client. I'm not sure why they did it that way, but they did. And if you follow those instructions, it's a piece of cake. But you only need to do that if you're not on campus. If you're on campus, you don't need VPN. This is done for security reasons because basically when you're working from a command prompt, and you can see I set idle a little too long, you can do some pretty damaging things from a command prompt, especially if you know what you're doing. So once again, I'm going to launch PuTTY because it closed on me. Well, here's the great part about this. We're going to use it once and then we'll be done with it. Isn't that wonderful? So all this work just to use it once. All right, so type in kronosgtc.edu right here and go ahead and click open, and then you will get a prompt. All right. At the prompt, you will enter your regular Kronos username. For me, and my hidden password, which is password, just in case you want to know. Now, here's the interesting part. If you guys have never done command line Unix before, when you type in your password, it doesn't echo back, you know, like an asterisk or a dot or anything. It just stays blank. But you should get the login, type in your username, press enter, type in your password, press enter, and then once you're logged in, you should see a prompt that looks like this. Your username, the @ sign, and then the machine name, which is misspelled, by the way. If you want to know where, it's supposed to be Chewie, like Chewbacca from Star Wars, because the server that runs Kronos is called the Death Star. It's a big giant IBM mainframe machine. So, all right. So anyhow, hopefully you've gotten this far. I'm going to pause real quick. All right. So now that we have everybody logged in here in class, we're going to proceed with the part that we need to do. So now we're logged into Kronos on the command line, and we need to create a database. And in order to create a database, we have to log into the MySQL software. So we logged into a server, command line, and inside that server, we're logging into a different server. Get the paradigm there? It's kind of interesting. So to do that, you want to type MySQL. I guess I got to be in the right program here. MySQL. And then you type -u, a space, your username, a space, and then -p. So once again, MySQL, space -u, space your username, space -p. Now you put in your database password. They might be different. For some people it is actually different depending on when the accounts were created and how they were created. For most of you, the password that you used up here to log in should be the same password. If it's not, it's possible that we set it up separately. If you want me to synchronize those passwords, you just need to tell me, and then I can do that for you. But you have to contact me. So, all right, so you put in your password and press enter, and now you can see we're logged into what's called the MySQL Monitor program. The equivalent program, like if you're thinking like SQL Server when you guys learned your database stuff, SQL Server is the database software. SQL Server Management Studio is the software we use to interface with the database. So MySQL Monitor, this command prompt, is the equivalent of the SQL Server Management Studio, except it's all command line. However, just like working with any of those database programs, you can type simple commands like show databases, like any SQL command that you could type, you can type here, press enter, and it will show you the output. And I know a lot of you know this already, and it's not to be patronizing in any way, But what we need to do now is we need to create a database for you that's going to be able to do the work we need to get this chapter done. All right, so now that we are working on this here, let's go ahead and type in the command that we need. We need to create a database, so what we're going to do is we're going to type create, then you're going to type database, right? You guys should know this stuff. Now, you guys know like the SQL rule, or convention I should say, where you should type your commands in all uppercase. You don't really have to do that. It works either way, but a lot of people learn the old-fashioned way, which was all uppercase. And if you're comfortable with that, just stick with it. So I'm going to type create database, and then I'm going to name the database, but the name of the database has to be preceded by your username and an underscore. And then the database name the book is using is called Java Book. Truth is, you can name it anything you want, but that's what the book does. Now you have to make a correlation too. So anywhere in the book where they're going to be calling the database Java Book, you have to add to it your username and the underscore. You're going to have to add that part to it. So I need you guys to go ahead and type a command that looks like this. So you'll say create database, and if your username was jsmith, you would say jsmith underscore Java Book and then a semicolon. If you typed it incorrectly, you press enter, you should get a little message back that pops up like this. It says query OK, one row affected. And then if you type in the command show databases, semicolon, then scroll up on your list, you can see we have lots of databases. You should be able to see right after your username underscore the name of the database, so that you should see an entry like that. So now while you guys are trying those couple of commands, and actually the command that got us to create the database is this one. So type in that command, and hopefully you get the same output, and then type show databases and go looking for it. And then let me know if you succeeded or not. I'm going to pause the video once again to make sure everybody's okay. All right, we have everybody in class is working fine. Everybody created a database, and then after they created it, I'm hoping you were able to find it on this list somewhere. And if that's the case, perfect. Believe it or not, our work here is done. That's all we need to do. Now when you look at what the book has, they have you basically log in, make sure that you're using the MySQL core database, and then you go ahead and you create a user, then you grant permissions and privileges and all this kind of stuff. We don't have to do that. All we're doing are basically the steps that follow. They're showing you how to do the commands. And then what they basically did is this step. So this step looks similar, right? And you notice we typed the same command, but notice this one is geared towards Windows users. So they're assuming you loaded MySQL on your own Windows machine. We're not doing that. We are using the one that's out on Kronos, which is a Linux server. The commands are basically the same, but what this is also showing you is that we inserted spaces right here, right between the U and the username. And you can actually, when you type that command, you do the -u, username, and then -p, you can actually type your password in plain text. But if you leave it off like we did, then it prompts you for the password. Okay, that's the rationale there. It's considered more secure to do it that way. But, you know, this is education, I suppose. Then we type this command, which was to create the database. The only difference was we inserted our username and an underscore here. And then where we're going to continue this little exercise is we're going to go back to the prompt and we're going to type use Java Book. So let's go ahead and do that. So at the prompt, use, we are going to type Java book. Remember, you got to put your username underscore and then Java book with a semicolon. Yeah. All it's telling you is that now for sure when we're typing our SQL commands, we're using that particular database. That's all that command does. All right, so once again, the point of that was now that the database is created, we are attaching to it so that any SQL commands that we type are going to be pointed towards that particular database. If you look at the next command, we're typing in a source command, and this is maybe something you did not do in your database class, I'm guessing, depending on who taught it. I know that I don't teach that in there because it's kind of beyond the scope of the class for the most part. But usually, if you're creating a database and you structure your data, it's not unusual to take like large text files and feed them into a database to populate the database, right? And we did that in that class, but we didn't do it in this fashion. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to get this file, script file, that's got a whole bunch of SQL commands in it, and we're just going to point to it, and then we're going to run it, and it'll build our whole database for us, so we don't have to build it, which is a really kind of a cool thing. Now the question is, where the heck is script.sql? All right, so we were asking the question here, where do you get that file? And it does say right here that you can get it from the supplement website. Right. Now that assumes you have the book with the code to get to the supplements. So what I am going to do is I'll show you where on the site you can get it. And if you, I do have a link in our resources page, I believe, that'll point you to this site. And then you click here to enter the site, log in. And then we have this, supplement site, and what we're looking for from this drop-down list is supplement. Then you got to click go, very cumbersome navigation. And then if you go back to the book, I think he said supplement 4. Okay, so we go to supplement 4 on the side, database supplements, I guess I should have guessed. And notice he's got a bunch of stuff in here. If you're not familiar with like SQL or Oracle or Access or any of that stuff, he's got all these PDFs. He's got like chapters and chapters and books and all sorts of stuff that go with this book. So when you pay that like $200 or whatever you pay to get it, you're really getting a lot of stuff with it. So it's really, it's a great book that way. All right, so what we need is the SQL statements. See this? We need SQL statements in MySQL. If you click this, notice what it brings back. It's a whole bunch of text, right? All right. So you can handle this a couple of different ways. You can you could right-click from the website and save as, or if you want, it's all text, right? You can just come in here, Control-A to select all, Control-C to copy, then go to your favorite text editor, like Notepad++ or whatever you choose, and then I'm just going to paste that in, and then you notice what he named the file in the book. He named it script.sql, so that's what we're going to name ours. So now that I have that in Notepad++, I'm going to click Save. I'm going to call it script.sql. It's probably not a bad idea to put it somewhere that I'm going to be able to find it. Like maybe in whatever chapter or folder you're storing your work in. So I'm going to put it in my folder for this class and save it. You can see as soon as I saved it, Notepad++ recognizes it's SQL. And then if you scroll through the document, you should see a lot of SQL commands that you kind of recognize. There's creating a table, it's even inserting records, but it's creating a number of tables. It's dropping in a lot of different values. You can see as I scroll through. The other thing that it does, which you are going to need to edit, is it tries to drop and then create the Java book database, right? So if you were to take this file and execute it on the server directly, it would destroy what you just did and it would recreate a database incorrectly. So what you're going to do is you're going to either comment these out or just delete them. Because we don't need to drop the database, just so you can see that, these first two lines. And in fact, before I go deleting them, we don't need to drop the database. We don't need to create it because we just did that. The other thing we don't need to do is create a user. We also don't need to grant any privileges. Also, because we typed this next command at the prompt, we don't need to type that one either. So now you could either delete this, like I'm going to do, or you can comment it out. You could, but here's the catch with that. The question was, can you edit it to have your own information? Absolutely, but you don't have permissions to create a user. This assumes root level access. So if you're not a root,
well, I mean, the part when you delete that top part out, where it says use Java book, can you just put your Java book name?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, you could put your Java book name in there.
Make sure that
Yeah, if you want to do that, you could type that command right there. All right, fine, I'll do that. You can see I'm pretty amiable to it. In fact, let's just comment this stuff out. I won't even delete it. I'll just do that. Make sure you save your changes. Now we got to get this script to load up. All right, so let's jump back over to the book for a minute. Now, notice that the command here is just source SQL script, or script SQL, right? This command is intended to be run at the MySQL prompt on a Windows machine, assuming you know where that file is. So we got a bunch of little caveats here. Let's see the complications. So now, Kronos users, we have to FTP this file to the server. Now, you guys should know how to do this as well, but just in case you don't, I'm going to guide you. I'm going to use a piece of software called Filezilla. People here on campus, you should have that loaded on the school machines. Those of you that happen to not have it installed, if you need to get the software, you have to go out to the web and just Google Filezilla. I also have a link to that within the resources page, or I should. If I don't, I'll add that as well. And then what you need to do is download the Filezilla client, and it should recognize your operating system automatically. And then you just download and install. Now, is there anybody here that is actually going through that process of installing it, or everybody's got Filezilla already? Everybody does. Okay. I have one little thing I really should add in here before we actually transfer any files, and I apologize to all the Mac people out there that I didn't give you command line instructions. Okay, as we were working through this command prompt stuff, it was very Windows-centric, and I know that I have a number of people out there that are Mac people, and I don't want to forget about you. So I've logged in remotely to my Mac at home, and in order to run the command prompt on a Mac, you can just simply click the little spotlight magnifying glass here and just type in terminal, or you can go to your application folder and find it. And in just a moment, over this slow remote connection, at least it shouldn't be that slow, there it is, you'll get a prompt, and in order to connect to Kronos from the prompt, it is being very slow. It should give me more than just a flashing cursor. So there we go. You need to type in the command SSH and then the name of the server. And I think that's all you need to do. Oh, except I got one issue. I need to connect via VPN first. So you do have to run the VPN on a Mac as well. And that's because that machine's off campus. That's a good example of that. Now, I don't know if this is going to give up here or if it's going to finish connecting. All right, I terminated the process. So I'm going to up arrow and try that again. All right, so then, all right, so this is actually bad, once again, because it's assuming I am connecting with my username from the Mac, which isn't the case. So I actually have to type in SSH, your username, at kronos.gtc.edu. And then you'll be connected to the machine. And from that point on, the prompts are identical. But see, with the Mac, because it's already basically a Unix machine, that capability is built in. And the method of connecting that we're using is called SSH. It's basically a encrypted protocol for doing command line stuff. That's really all it is. All right, so let's continue on now and do our FTP part. Once you have Filezilla up and running, you need to type the Kronos server name up in this little box here. So you type kronos.gtc.edu, your username, and then your password, and connect. Now, to connect your database to that script file, all you need to do is put it in the root of your Kronos account. People that have done web work in our classes, you're used to putting everything inside public HTML. The exception might be if you had one of the PHP classes and we were doing the same kind of thing where we loaded SQL scripts. So all you need to do now is on the local side of your machine, and I do have to find the right folder here. I'm going to find Java 2, my fall 2016 folder, and there you see the SQL script. So I navigated through my file system on my local machine. This is the local machine, this is the remote machine. I found the folder where my script file is, and I'm just going to grab it and drag it and drop it on the right side. Don't drop it into one of the folders. Drop it into an empty area or on top of the other files. And then you should see the file there. If you know you transferred it and it doesn't show up, do a right-click, refresh. Filezilla kind of has a quirk sometimes where it doesn't always refresh after you upload. All right, so now that the file is there, we can go back to the prompt, either through PuTTY or terminal if you're on a Mac. And at this point, you'll type that command, source script.sql with a semicolon, and press enter. Now it did it super lightning fast, so I'm going to go back up and see all the stuff that I just did. This is the command, once again, just in case you didn't catch it. Just source space script.sql with a semicolon at the end. This assumes that the location of your file is in the root of your file system on Kronos. If for some reason you put it in a different folder, you would have to append to the beginning of the file name the path. So if I had a folder called database, I would say /database/script.sql. Okay, that's not going to be the case for you guys. If you did what I just did with Filezilla, that's all you need to type. So once again, I'm going to take a quick pause here to make sure that everybody's okay. Okay, so everybody in class here managed to run this, and when I got to the bottom, I saw this, right? Oh, that looks fine. But it is throwing some error messages, and basically what it does is it runs all the different queries that are inside that script file and then gives you the result. We do have an error here that says unknown table. So why do you think this is the case?
They named the table differently than that.
That's right. So we need to actually go in, because it's using a schema name here, right? So what we have to do is we actually have to go into the SQL file now and fix it. Okay. So we have somebody already looking at the file, so I'm going to do the same thing. And then you're going to see, wow, isn't this fun? So now I'm scrolling through the script file very carefully. There's a bunch of create tables. Okay, those are fine. Create student, create course, create college. Then it's going to insert some information, insert some more information, more information. These are all fine. So it's responding to all these different queries.
Line 388 is what I think it is.
Okay. But as I keep scrolling through, it starts looking for these tables and those aren't actually the issue. So we keep going, we keep going. Yeah, these guys are calling out the line. You guys are blowing my fun here. What I'm trying to show you is that you need to do what I'm doing, which is carefully look through it and see where the error might be. But we did have somebody find where it says drop table country. And then create table country. So why is that a problem? What makes that wrong?
We don't have table country. It doesn't exist.
Ah, so is that wrong? You can't drop what you don't have. Yeah, you could comment that out if you want, but that's exactly right. Chris hit it right on the head. It's dropping it just in case you already have it, because one of the things you're going to be messing with your code is messing with the country table. So what if you've done the work already and you messed it up? So it's dropping it so you can recreate the table. So that's why you're getting the error message. And if you want to really be sure about that, you can do what I'm doing is I'm in PHP My Admin, and I'm looking here for my Java book. Oh, it doesn't seem to be there. And I'm just going to refresh because I haven't refreshed that for a bit. Okay, I'm not even logged in, no wonder. All right. Yeah, and there it is. There's my Java book table. And then if I look here, country table's there. It didn't do anything wrong, folks. It didn't do nothing bad happened. It's just, right. It makes all these provisions for like fail safes that aren't really basically affecting us at all. So we're creating tables, we're inserting values. The only problem would really come in is if we are messing with the schema. The only reason it brought up the schema there is because we indicated it here. But that error message that we saw in the prompt is basically nothing to be concerned about, because when we're dropping it, and it doesn't exist, it's not really a problem. Okay?
What's with the warning messages?
The warning messages will be related to something that didn't work quite as intended. So let's, if we can find an example of, all right, the very first query. The database changed is what happens when you type use. So the very next query statement in there is drop table if exists. Does it exist? No. So you're going to get warning, 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 warning. That's what you're going to get. So then if you look at your script file, you have just that many warnings.
So why does it go warning there, but down towards the bottom goes there? Because it doesn't say drop if it exists. It just says drop.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the answer to that question was, why does it say error versus warning? This one has the if exists in there, and it didn't.
So that begs the question, why did you do that?
That's a great question, Chris. I didn't write the code. He did. So the question was then, why doesn't he have drop table if exists country? He didn't. He just did that. And then, of course, it's going to throw an error. All right, but we figured out what all those are now, right? We feel comfortable that we can proceed. And if you really want to do a fail-safe, you can go to this database administration tool, which is at this URL. All you need to type is this part of it, and it brings up phpMyAdmin. It's a graphical user interface to interface with the database on Kronos instead of doing it from the command line. And you would log in with your username, and then you'll see your database stuff, and you'll see all the tables, and then you can go in there, you can look at the information in there, and apparently that table's empty. The other thing that you should know about it is that you also have the capability here, just like you would in the SQL Server Management Studio, where you can just type in SQL statements directly and have them execute. Another piece of food for thought for you guys, if you're curious about working with the databases, there's also a piece of software called MySQL Workbench. It's free. It's made by the people that create MySQL, which is Oracle, which is Java, all those programs. And that gives you an interface that looks a little bit more like the SQL Server Management Studio, if it ever launches. Let's see if it does. Okay, it finally launched. And basically what you can do here is you establish connections. So like if you want to add a connection, you come up here, you give it a name, give it a host name, and there you would put in, what would you guess? Kronos, right? And I already have a connection set up, so you can take a look at this if you wish. It tells you what all the information is. Then you can connect to it, and once again, this will give you an interface that looks much like the SQL Server Management Studio. And if you're comfortable with that environment, you'll be very comfortable with this one. Once again, you can see you can type stuff in, and then you can execute your query, and you can see it interface. You can also see the complete architecture of your database here on the left. And if you're comfortable with that environment, this is a great tool. It's really a nice tool. Not that you have to use it for the stuff that we're doing. Frankly, it doesn't really matter. The parts that were important for us was connecting to the server, creating the database, and feeding it that SQL file that builds out all the tables and populates it with data. All right, so we have a good portion of the work done that we need to do. We've loaded up the script. Then they go through the process here of explaining to us how to create and drop tables and all that kind of stuff. So they go through all these different SQL statements. And what I'm trying to get to is the part we need, which is this part. All right. So actually what I'm going to do here in class is I'm going to take a really quick pause, because we haven't taken a break the whole time. So let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and continue. All right, we're back from our break, and we're about to dig into the next part. And you can see it, seemingly what would be something that would take us like 5 minutes to do takes us a while because there's all these little details we have to work out. But we're finally to the point where we have database created on a MySQL server that we can connect to. The database has been created and populated. All the tables are there, all the contents there that we need. Now it's time for us to talk about JDBC, and basically what this refers to is a method or a collection of software tools really that allow us to interface with the database provided we have the right connection script to do the work. Now, they show here kind of this little diagram, and I know this is in my other lecture videos too, but it's indicating that we have our program running, then we have the JDBC component, which is an API. You guys should be familiar with that acronym. And then that will, from that program or a collection of commands and stuff, you will have the capability of getting the right driver to run the database connection that you need. You'll notice that MySQL and Oracle directly interface with the database using their connection scripts. No surprise that MySQL is an Oracle product, Java, right? And that Oracle, well, that's an Oracle product too, so the connection is direct. But if you're working with a Microsoft database, you need to get this bridge driver in the middle of it too. So one of the reasons why we push towards MySQL is it's just a simpler way to work. All right, so once you get all of this going, you're going to discover that you need to find from some resource, and basically that comes from online, you need to get the connection driver from MySQL. All right, notice it has a class name and it has a file. And I've saved you a little bit of trouble here, because if you go to your unit folder, right with the exercise, you're going to see that I included a jar file. A jar file means Java archive. It's Java's version of a zip file, is what it is. It's one file that contains many. All right. So if you go ahead and you download that, and don't worry about the warnings it throws up. So if you download that, now you have it on your machine. What you're going to want to ideally do is take that file and move it to where your work is. So I'm going to go to where my files are located for this class and for this semester. And I've been working on all these different chapter exercises here, right? So I'm actually going to place that within, I guess I should probably have a chapter 32 folder. You know what good way to create that? You could do it right through Eclipse. That would be one way to do it. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to bring up my version of Eclipse. Watch it take a long time to load. And we'll say OK. I'm pushing my machine pretty hard right now. Got a lot of stuff that's very memory intensive running. It's like watching paint dry.
So what is that then? I downloaded it, moved it into McDonald's.
Okay, well, we are going to create an application that's going to connect to that file. This is just running way slower than it ever should. All right, finally loaded. I'm not sure why it took so long, but it did. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new Java project, and we're going to make one for chapter 32. All right, and then if you go back to your folders, you're going to see that it created the folder. See that? If you want, you can directly move the file in there, or we can move it in after the fact. The question is going to be, where do we put it? That's really going to be the true question here. So we'll resolve that issue in just a moment, but do take that bin file and at the very least for the moment put it in the root of this folder, and worst case scenario we'll move it. We just have it on hand. We'll figure out where it goes in just a moment. All right, so now what we're going to need to do is create a program, and what we're going to do is we're going to follow the code in the book. So where's my book? Here's the book. And they're going to show us some of the connection strings and the pattern that we use. So when we are going to be connecting to a MySQL database, we are going to be throwing in a string that looks like this. And what this string does, of course, is it tells us that we're using JDBC, or that we're using the API that does the connections. Then we're using MySQL, and then kind of in the form of a URL, like a protocol, it's indicating what our host name is and what our database name is. Now that's stuff that you guys should know already, but if you look at the example here, the connection string that we're going to create is going to look very much like this. So in place of localhost, we are going to have kronos.gtc.edu, and then instead of Java book, we're going to have username underscore database name, and then you're going to use your username and your password. That's going to be what we're doing. All right, so they go through a whole set of stuff here, but my interest right now is that we take this here, this code that they have here, we're going to copy it. Now if I copy from here, I'm going to grab line numbers too, so I'm not going to do that. But I do have the sample files from the author, so I'm going to pause the video for a second and go find. Okay, so I went ahead and I located the file. If you downloaded the sample files for the book, and these you don't even need a login for, these are all the files that are used that are in the chapters. So if you have examples in chapter 32, you come to this folder and you pull that file out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open this up. Oh, wait, I didn't want to do that. I'm going to actually pull this right into Eclipse. So I'm just going to grab this, hover over the Eclipse icon here. It cooperates. Hello? Nope, it doesn't want to do that. All right, apparently Eclipse won't let you do that, so I'm going to bring it up this way. And then I'm just going to drag it into chapter 32 here. So I'm just going to pull it over, drop it into the source folder. I'm going to copy the files. And then let's go ahead and open that file. Now it does have a package declaration at the top, which I'm going to promptly delete. And then you're going to notice here that it does have an import. It has the SQL import so that we can utilize SQL statements and stuff. And then you're going to see that they have a number of different things in here, and our focus right now is the fact that we're working with MySQL. Now we already talked about how this should look when all of it's set up correctly. So first thing that happens here is it loads the driver. So any of the programs that you're going to run that's going to do this database connection stuff, it's going to have this stuff present. So the first thing we do is we load the driver, and notice we're doing a little console output that says driver loaded. Then we're establishing a connection. It's a new connection of type connection. And we're invoking driver manager and then the get connection. And what that's going to do now is we're going to send that connection script over. So notice that here it says localhost, Java book, Scott, Tiger, right? But in order for it to actually work, we need to tweak that a little bit, as we discussed. And in our case, what it has to say is kronos.gtc.edu, so it knows to go to an external machine. And it'll still be Java book, but we have to append our username to the beginning. And then we also need to put our username here, and then type our password, yes, in plain text, right there. And no, I'm not typing password as a sample, but my password's actually password. So now, when this connection works, once again, the console will throw out a message saying database connected. The next thing that's going to happen is we'll create a statement, and that will be in the form of a SQL statement. And then we're going to set up another object here called result set that's going to allow us to execute the query. But when the query is done, it will store the value in result set. So that's what an object of type result set is, just retrieving a query and holding it. Then finally, we're going to set up a little loop here that's going to loop through the results, because it might be one result or many results. And then it's basically going to pull from that result set strings, put in a tab, and get the next set of results. So actually it's doing that 3 times. So if you look at the stuff that's happening here in the query, we're going to select first name, middle initial, last name from the student table where the last name equals Smith. All right, that's in essence what's happening here. It's nothing fancy in any way, shape, or form. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this, but now we need to have that file available to us. That's kind of our big mystery at the moment, right? Where do we put that database connection file? Well, that database connection file ends up going in the same folder with your code. Got that? Question is, which folder holds your code? Source folder holds the code. And now I'm realizing I'm not on screen, am I? All right, give me just a second here. All right, so let's take that file, which was up a couple of folder levels for me. All right, so this is chapter 32. And what we should have is the jar file. So I'm going to cut that. I'm going to drop it into our source folder. All right, our database, little mini database program is saved. And then I'm also going to go ahead and just click run. All right, and we are getting an error. All right, so what is it telling us? Java language class not found exception MySQL.JDBC driver. So I must have put it in the wrong place. Who's read the book? I see everybody read the book, right? Very thoroughly. Where do I put the file, folks? Source. Isn't that what we just did? Yeah. There's actually a step we're missing. And I don't know if they really explained it at all. But if you come up here, I think it's in this spot here, come up to Project and then Properties. Sound familiar? Yeah, it does sound familiar. Okay. Now the question is, where in here do we go? All right, I finally got a student to look it up in the book, so I don't have to. A little further up. Okay. It says if you use an IDE such as Eclipse or NetBeans, you need to add these jar files into the library in the IDE. So for us, in Eclipse, at least that's what we're using right now. Let me just show you how to get here. You go to Project, Properties, go to Java Build Path, click on Libraries, add the jar file, and then if it's inside your folders here, wait, I don't see it. So now what do I do? Well, you notice what I just did?
Did you add external?
Yeah, add external. That's exactly what I just did, Nick.
Okay.
So now I'm going to navigate to that spot on my hard drive, if I remember where that is, my Google Drive. So really, it doesn't matter where it is because you're pulling it in this way anyhow. So I'm just going to go ahead, open it. You can see that it's now a library that is accessible to the project. I'm going to click Apply. Then I'm going to click OK. And then if we did everything correctly, it will come up right here. See this? So now if I go to run the program, driver loaded, database connected, and it pulled back 3 names. This is all happening in the console. Now, that's the extent of what we accomplished tonight. So if you're wondering why I gave you so much time to do this chapter, it's because getting this part to work can be a challenge. So if you got it working and we clear this hurdle, then doing the exercises are really a piece of cake once you get that first database connection going. All right, folks, I'm going to pause the video here once again, and in fact, I might just stop it at this point. I want to make sure everybody here is working okay, and then we're going to call it a night. All right, after somewhat of a pause here, we finally figured out everybody's issues here in class, and everybody got it up and running successfully, and hopefully you do too. Once you have this part of it in place where you can connect to the database and basically interface with it, then the exercises will be a piece of cake. All right, that ends this video. We'll see you next week.